and I'll tell you when we're
Is it,
broadcasting.
and is it possible for me to share my screen?
I will share, and you can just say next, and we are
Okay.
live.
Okay, thank you.
We're live.
All right, so we're live now. This is Matt. This is Matt Coogan, the Chief of Staff for Mayor Holliday for the City of Newburyport. Looks like we have a couple of attendees trickling in right now. We're starting a few minutes late, but thank you for logging into this Zoom webinar. This is a public presentation about a wayfinding strategy project that we've been working on through the planning office and with a consultant called Harriman. So with me, we have Jordy Vining, Senior Project Manager in the Planning Department, and we also have Andy Port, the Planning Director. From Harriman, we have Emily Inez and also Camilo Espitia. I'm sorry, did I get that right? Camilo?
That is correct.
All right, yeah, sorry. I'm trying not to fumble on your names.
Nice.
So we're really fortunate to have to be able to work with Hamilton on this project. I'm only with the city for a couple of years, but I know that wayfinding, the efforts of wayfinding go back several years, and there's several existing wayfinding systems in the city and some really nice signage in general. But we were able to get technical assistance to bring on Harriman through a Massachusetts Downtown Initiative grant. We applied for that grant a while ago. I think this is about a year in the making that we've been working with Harriman. Like a lot of projects, COVID really affected some of our scheduling, and this one kind of went to the wayside for a brief hiatus, and we were able to come back together and bring it back to the finish line. So again, we're really happy to have a consulting firm like Harriman on board to help us strategize on wayfinding. And I think what you'll see coming up, it's really a strategy. It's about how we should be considering our wayfinding system, getting people into the city, but also getting them into our desired areas. And I think predominantly that's our downtown area. This is definitely an economic development priority. As far as helping our downtown businesses, and it's especially now important because we are in this recovery mode, and we all know that our businesses have definitely been greatly affected by COVID and continue to recover, and we're still not out of this yet. So I think wayfinding is another tool that'll help people get downtown easier, get them parked in the right places, out of their cars, and walking in our significantly walkable, beautiful downtown. Another thing that I want to mention too is, if there are some silver linings from coming from COVID, we've been able to do some pretty interesting and outside of the box changes to our downtown as far as outdoor dining. Those in the audience in Newburyport, I'm sure you've frequented some of our outdoor dining locations on State Street or Pleasant Street, or in some of the parking lots outside of town where, our restaurateurs have been very creative and created new outdoor seating areas with the cooperation of our licensing commission, our city council, and all of our government bodies. So we were able to create some interesting new exciting outdoor dining areas. Obviously, particularly the ones that are in the parklet style, which eliminate parking spaces downtown. I think, which is I would say a good thing, but it does draw attention to the fact that where are we bringing our visitors that predominantly are coming by automobile. But I mean, it's not only an automobile strategy, but it's also ped strategy and biking strategy. So I don't want to get too far ahead, but I just want to do a brief introduction. This meeting will be recorded, so it will be available. We'll have a project website through the planning department, as well as the slides themselves. I'll stop talking now, and I will turn it over to Emily from Harriman. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So my name is Emily Inez. I'm the Director of Planning for Harriman. I'm joined by my colleague, Camilo Espitia, who has been doing the vast majority of the work on this, and he's going to take you through the presentation. I just want to echo Matt's comments on this as being really about getting the right signs in the right places to direct people to get from their cars to their feet and into the businesses. And so this is about economic development, and it's about making the downtown and the journey to the downtown and through the downtown the best journey possible for both visitors, going to that economic development, but also for residents by reducing traffic congestion. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Camilo, and he can take us through the presentation. We look forward to your comments and questions at the end. So Camilo?
Thank you, Emily. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having us here. Again, my name is Camilo Espiti, and I'm an urban planner and designer from Harriman, and we are the team that is assisting the city in the Newburyport downtown wayfinding strategy as part of a Massachusetts downtown initiative from the Department of Housing and Community Development. And if we go to the next page, I wanted to start introducing, or at least introduce quickly, the people who have been part of the process, which from the city side include Matt, who already introduced himself, Matt Coogan, who is the Mayor's Office Chief of Staff, Andrew Port, who's the Director of Planning and Development, and Jordi Vinen, who's the Senior Project Manager. And then from our team, from our side, the Harriman side, is Emily Hines, who already introduced herself, and myself from the Harriman team. Today we'll be looking at basically what wayfinding means, just to clarify what that is. We'll see what the benefits are, the goals for Newburyport, why are we doing this now. We'll see how do we carry out our process. We'll also see some examples of similar exercises from of other communities. We look at the existing conditions and our findings. We look at the way we set up the signage network for the city. We'll see examples of how that could look like from the perspective of scale and signage types. We'll see what those types could be specifically for Newburyport. We'll see some proposed locations for new signage, and where some of the existing signage could be updated or where some of it could remain as part of the entire network. And then we'll take a pause, we'll take a little break just to have a session of questions and comments where we can respond to some of your concerns and observations. And then we'll close with next steps to start the implementation process. So on the next page, what is wayfinding? It is a coordinated and easily understandable signage system that helps people move from one place to another within a designated area. But basically, it helps people move easier and find things easier to help people focus on what they want to do rather than trying to find those things. And this is especially true for drivers, which is one of our goals, which is we want to make sure that they find parking as quickly as possible so that we can have them off their cars as soon as they arrive to the downtown area. So in the next page, we look at what are the benefits of wayfinding. Well, as we mentioned earlier, a wayfinding strategy supports efficient travel to and within an area. It also reduces vehicular traffic in that area. It improves the people's ability to walk and bike, in this case in downtown, but it also increases awareness of events and destinations. But also increases the actual trips, not only the awareness, but the actual trips to those destinations, which in the end contribute to economic development by supporting the businesses in the area. And in fact, there are studies that show increased attendance in cities or towns that have implemented wayfinding strategies similar to what we're trying to do. There have been increased name recognition and transportation use, and a decrease in the use of cars, which goes with the idea of promoting a walkable experience. And then on the next page, with those benefits, basically they started shaping some of the goals that we have specifically crafted for Newburyport, and include improving traffic flow, encouraging visitors, especially drivers, to park once, and started navigating the downtown on foot, providing wayfinding and sites and signs for downtown destinations and activities to support businesses, creating a unifying signage and wayfinding strategy with the variety of signage that we already have in Newburyport and the downtown, and reinforcing the identity of downtown Newburyport. And so on the next slide, why are we having this meeting now, given all that's going on during these times? We actually started this process by the end of last year, and obviously the pandemic happened and things slowed down a bit. And so with the idea of things reopening and people slowly returning to restaurants and businesses, and with the idea of supporting these businesses, we thought that this is probably the best time to use this as an opportunity to provide a positive message from the city tied to support for local businesses and support for the community. And last, because we also think this is also a time to start that conversation with the community about funding and how do we implement this strategy. And so, next slide. Our process and the methodology essentially started as part of the Massachusetts Downtown Initiative, sponsored by the Department of Housing and Community Development, in which we started assisting the city with this study. And so we had a series of meetings with the city to make sure that we were aligned on the goals of the project. We presented our inventory and existing conditions. We researched precedent examples. We then presented the signage hierarchy and strategy to the city. And finally, the implementation steps to make sure that this could become a reality before we brought it up to the community today for discussion. So on the next slide, we thought we'll show you first what wayfinding looks like in other communities, especially in communities that are similar to Newburyport and that have been successful in how they visually express their uniqueness and their understanding of place as so sort of single entity. And so, for instance, North Adams here in Massachusetts had this rebranding design project funded by the North Adams Partnership to improve the image and sort of the boost that business climate for the city. And then the next example, the next page, you have Wellesley, also here in Massachusetts, and they did it specifically for Wellesley Square. And they actually did it with the help of a grant from the Massachusetts Downtown Initiative, just like what we're trying to do. The next page, you'll see Falmouth in Maine, which started the project after their 2013 Comprehensive Master Plan actually suggested the need for a wayfinding strategy for the town to navigate efficiently to some of their specific destinations in town, also focused with the idea of economic development. The next page, this is obviously even outside the country, but we thought it was relevant because just like Newburyport, they have a very distinctive geographic element. In their case, they used a design that reflected their local geography and ecology. And I think Newburyport has a tremendous opportunity with the waterfront as the focal point, especially in the downtown area. The next page, you'll see Charleston in South Carolina, which includes signage for their public parks and special districts that is consistent with the city's branded identity. And you can see how the colors and details are very similar in all their signage. The next page, which is actually something we really like a lot, is Savannah in Georgia. And we like this example a lot because just like Newburyport, their downtown has this very rich architectural character. And they have this sense of being a historic place. And also because they used some of their existing infrastructure to implement some of their signage, being able to reduce costs. And then the last example, which is the next page, which is in Alexandria in Virginia, which is like Savannah and Newburyport, also have a very rich character. But what's interesting is that they approach design in a different way, because instead of having signage that looks all the same, they decided that on the contrary, depending on the type of scale of the signage, their designs would make sure that those unique conditions are branded and that people understand better their location within the city. Now, how do we see Newburyport during our visits? In the next page, for our inventory and findings, we drove in, we took pictures, we walked all over the downtown, and we made sure we understood the existing conditions as much as possible. And that included making sure that we saw areas where there was missing signage or conflicting or redundant signage, but we also captured current signage that looks really good, that has good design, that is clear, and that could definitely be part of this whole strategy. And so the very first thing we noticed is how challenging it was for us to arrive at downtown Newburyport without the help of our GPS, especially at points where you had to make a decision on where to turn or a roundabouts. And I think what is important about these pictures is that these locations help us see that this can be a challenge coming from other directions. It means a single picture basically illustrates the condition we're describing as a condition that might be present in the entire city of Newburyport, not specifically to Parker and Malcolm Way. And so on the next picture, on the next slide, sorry. For example, once you go through the journey of trying to find downtown Newburyport, it is also important to understand whether you have arrived or not at downtown. And so there is some signage that takes you to the Welcome Center and the Maritime Museum, but it is not really clear that you are already in downtown or that you are a point of transition into the downtown. So these again are just some pictures for some locations, but it generally applies to the idea that signage would be helpful for people to understand their arrival point at all entrances into downtown. On the next page, once you enter, you start seeing signage that directs you to parking. And we're focused on the Titcom garage because it is the one closer to the edges of the downtown area. And it is the garage that ideally would receive drivers to get them off their cars and on foot as fast as possible. And we know that, I think at the beginning of this year, maybe at the end of the last, new parking signage was added in the area, which is very helpful for drivers. And on the next page, once you're fully into the downtown area, there's some different types of signages. So here we see signage pointing to parking and the waterfront and signaling events as well. So there's a variety of signage within a very reduced space of the downtown. And then on the next one, the next slide, in some particular areas, there is signage that has a different function. For instance, this one, for example, locates you at a public space, but also starts telling you some of the history of Newburyport. And the function of this type of sign is essential to educate visitors, but also residents on the cultural richness of the downtown. And again, these pictures are just basically collecting information on the different types of signs that are present in downtown Newburyport. And specifically in this case, they're something that we will address later as something that could remain. On the next slide, then we know that we also have the rail trail, which has a portion of it that goes through the downtown, and of course it is part of the whole downtown experience. And there is signage of very high quality, as well as parts where signage would be helpful to keep the consistency for people to keep using the trail. On the next slide, how do we define the needs for signage in an area, but particularly for Newburyport? So let's start with the way people access downtown Newburyport. That's important because it helps us understand where signage makes sense to help people get to the downtown area. And so here you're mostly vehicular access from State, from Route 1, from Merrimack Street and Water Street. And you also have some pedestrian access that would come mostly from the rail trail. You have some one streets that become part of that flow on how you enter the downtown area. But essentially what this means is that it starts helping us understand where signage is important or where signage will be located and helpful for people to navigate into downtown area. And then on the next slide, once you have arrived, you have what are called the gateways, which basically mean those points that signal that you have arrived at downtown. And it essentially tells you that these are the boundaries, even if they're invisible. And this is important because it starts differentiating the downtown from other areas, and it starts signaling that there is something unique, something special that you can only find in this downtown. So in the next page, we started these conversations of districts. This is sort of a new thing that is not really there in downtown yet, but basically these are some areas that help people understand the downtown even better because they reduce the spaces they have to remember, or basically it helps them identify themselves in terms of location. And as much as you understand the downtown as a different area within Newburyport with unique characteristics, these districts also help you brand downtown with even more unique things to offer. So this is really a great strategy for economic development. So imagine New York City, and then you have Manhattan, which is obviously different than Brooklyn and Queens. And within Manhattan, you also have Soho. And people know that this is where you would find something very specific in terms of clothing or fashion, for example. So that's the way to sort of reduce the scale of how you understand a place. And it's probably as famous as New York itself. And so it is an opportunity to use some sort of cues within downtown for people to identify Newburyport as something very, very unique. So here in Newburyport, we have the waterfront as a district, we have downtown district, we have the Tannery Marketplace, and the Frog Pond. And so on the next slide, that's when you finally arrive at your destinations. And that is, for instance, the museums, the police station, a specific parking facility, or the market square. And what is important about the strategy is that it is flexible enough to add or edit some of these destinations. And these were discussed with the city throughout our process, but they can be updated in the future and still be part of the entire wayfinding network. And the next page, here you may have noticed that this is a downtown wayfinding strategy and that this is part of a downtown initiative. But throughout the process and conversations with the city, we felt that it wouldn't hurt to add destinations outside the downtown for the sake of economic development and be able to direct people to points that are commercially important for the city as a whole. So we added the shopping plazas on Story Avenue and the rail send by the train station. So you will see how these get incorporated into the signage network. And again, the idea is that if there's additional areas in the future that represent economic development opportunities for the city, they can be easily plugged in and incorporated into the strategy. So the next slide, here's what we can see geographically what this network can become. And how do you arrive from outside the city into your final downtown destination and what happens in between. So first of all, I want to clarify that this is just a diagram of the city. It's not an actual map. It's not to any scale. That's why you can see the downtown area larger than what it actually is. But it's basically to show that there is a relationship between the boundaries of the city and the downtown and how there are roads that take you there. So obviously, these are not all the roads of the city, but rather a representation of those connecting you to downtown and how there are turns or instances where you need to be reminded how to get to downtown. We'll see how that works in the next slide. So in the next one, just to add to that idea of those relationships between city and downtown, here's those districts that we talked about earlier. These are the smaller sub-areas within the downtown. And you also see now here the rail trail, which is obviously part of the entire experience. On the next slide, this is basically the first signage that you would need is the one that tells you that you are in the city of Newburyport. Is the first thing you need to understand as a visitor. Basically, it is about recognizing that you are in the city, and at the same time using this signage to start telling you how to get to downtown, which means it will tell you go straight, go left, go right, and basically orienting you towards downtown Newburyport, which is really essentially our main goal. On the next slide, once you have passed the boundaries of the city in very specific locations, you will see signage that starts guiding you towards downtown. Maybe you have to make a right, maybe you have to make a left, maybe you simply go straight, but what it does is that it helps you keep moving in the right direction. And it will also tell you how far you are from the downtown. It will also start guiding you towards those city destinations that we talked earlier, which are the shopping plazas and the rail send. And so in the next slide, at this point, you would have arrived to these destinations, both the plazas and the rail send. And at this layer of the network, you would also start seeing those gateway signs that tell you that you have arrived at downtown Newburyport. This same signage at the gateways, drivers would be directed towards parking, and for pedestrians, those on the trail or maybe arriving on some of the roads, you would guide them towards the districts. So on the next slide, for drivers, again, the priority is to take them to parking facilities as fast as possible, especially the Tipcom garage, very quickly to reduce traffic. They will see the signage that tells them that they have arrived at a specific parking facility. And once they park, they'll start being guided towards the districts on foot. And so on the next slide, these are the districts. At this point, everybody should be navigating the downtown on foot. Drivers are already off their cars, and you will see signage that helps you recognize the districts we talked about earlier. You see, for example, a sign that says the Tannery or the Frog Pond. That same sign will start telling you how to get to those specific downtown destinations. It will start orienting you to these very specific points within downtown, depending on where you want to go. So the next slide, this is finally where you have arrived at your destination. You will see the name of the museum or the police station or the marketplace and all these destinations that we have on the list that we discussed earlier. And so you can basically see the sequence of signage to be able to go from the city boundaries into the final downtown destinations. Each of those obviously will have different sizes. They will be different types, messages, and their functions will vary per use. For example, if you're driving, the type of signage will be different than if you're walking. I also wanted to clarify that since this is a diagram, this doesn't mean that these are all the quantities that will be needed. This is basically a framework to understand the relationship between all the signs that will be part of the network that is very specific to Newburyport, and to give an idea of where signage will be needed depending on specific road conditions or places where we think signage will be needed to help visitors arrive to downtown. So on the next slide, here are some of the examples of that scale and type that we talked about earlier. First, you need that vehicular signage that tells you that you have arrived or that you're in the city of Newburyport. That same sign is supposed to tell you where to go to get to the downtown. And you see the scale of these signs are bigger, they're for higher speeds, they're to be seen from afar. When you move to the next slide, this is another example of vehicular signage that keeps guiding you towards downtown, and it also helps you understand that you are in the city. Again, still larger signage for different speeds, different types. And then on the next slide, you see the signage that tells you that you have arrived at downtown Newburyport. Here you see that there is a combination of both pedestrian signage with some vehicular signage, and you start noticing how the types and sizes start getting slightly smaller, the lettering also slightly smaller, and even some of the height for these signs also start getting a little bit shorter. So on the next slide, once you have entered downtown, you see the signage for the districts. Here, the signage becomes a little bit more detailed, so you start seeing more information in them. It is more pedestrian scale. And even for parking, this signage is slightly smaller and less bulky because at this point, the speeds are supposed to be reduced. On the next slide, finally, you see your signage for your destination. At this point, this is completely pedestrian in scale. It is much smaller than the other signage. And of course, it is simpler. It's just about the park, the museum, the library, and etc. as our list of destinations would go. So on the next slide, so here's some of the examples for a type and scale and message that we're discussing earlier. Now, these are specific to Newburyport, and I wanted to clarify that these are not design options. These are just messaging examples of what a specific sign should have in it based on conditions that are particular to Newburyport. And it is important to clarify that and this whole exercise does not include design as part of the scope. All that we have researched and prepared as a strategy and as a network is something that we have prepared as a framework so that the design agency that will get contracted at the end would come up with the actual colors and fonts and details. But we also have to go through the stage of finding those exact locations and identifying the specific needs for signage. So the first thing we need, as I mentioned before, is making sure people know they are in the city of Newburyport and immediately start orienting them towards downtown. So basically, welcome to the city of Newburyport, and then now downtown Newburyport to the right or to the left. That's it. It's very simple. On the next slide, once you have passed the city boundary and you are on your way to the downtown, you will see the signage that helps you continue that journey, right? So it will basically tell you to keep going straight or make a right or a left, and it will give you a distance. This also includes the city destinations that we discussed before. Again, this location list is meant to be flexible enough so that if in the future there is a different point of the city that needs to be included as part of the network, it can be accommodated without changing the strategy. Then on the next slide, this is the signage that indicates that you have arrived to those specific locations. So you will identify the downtown or the city destinations. And then at the same time, you start seeing how to get to these sub-areas called districts. And so you will see, for instance, welcome to downtown Newburyport, but also you will see waterfront to the right or frog pond, just keep going straight. And specifically for drivers, you will start seeing parking signage to get them to park as fast as possible. So parking to the right or to the left. And then on the next slide, here's where you would see signage to identify the districts we talked about before. So you will see the recognition signage that says frog pond or maybe welcome to frog pond or waterfront. And then that same signage will start seeing how to get to certain destinations. So you will see orientation signage that tells you that to go to the visitor center, you need to make a right, or very importantly, you will see how far you are to encourage people to walk. And we thought that measuring that by time rather than distance will be easier for people to know how much they have to walk. Again, this list is flexible so that we can adjust the destinations in the future as necessary. Then on the next slide, here at this point, you finally arrive to your destination. And that means basically signage that helps you recognize the place. So either the Maritime Museum or the library. And what is helpful here is that if you have a temporary event, they should be part of that strategy, right? So that there is a connection to the entire network. So for example, a farmer's market should use those same guidelines, be it fonts or colors or shapes that come out of the whole design exercise. So on the next page, here's some of the areas that we think signage could be included or updated or simply retained when we have a really good example of existing signage that's already existing in the downtown area. So again, here are some points where we think signage would be helpful to be included to help people arrive at downtown Newburyport. And as I mentioned earlier, this goes hand in hand with the map, the diagram that we saw earlier, because these are not the only locations where this type of signage will be included, right? These are basically to explain that in general, this is a type of location or condition where signage would have to be part of the strategy. So places where, such as decision points or points where even if you're already going in the right direction, they are a reminder of how the fact that you are in the right direction, but you're an X, Y, or Z distance from downtown. And then to the right of the slide, you see some examples of what that could look like. So the scale or the type of signs that would be the ones to be included in the area. And this is helpful for when a graphic design agency is actually contracted to finally design the actual plaque or band or plate. And so on the next slide, here's signage that would be a gateway signage, basically that helps you identify the fact that you have arrived at downtown Newburyport. And so for example, on the intersection of State Street and Green Street, or when you get off Route 1 and are entering through Merrimack, or on Water Street and State Street. And so those are places where a gateway signage would be very helpful for drivers to know that where they are and to guide them. Very, very important to guide them to parking. And then to the right, you see general examples of what that could look like in terms of scale or typology. On the next slide, here we have the potential to have signage that helps you identify the newly created districts, and the signage that would start guiding you towards the final downtown destinations. That includes banners that can be easily added to existing infrastructure where you already have, or basically a small totem signage in areas where it wouldn't be an inconvenience for walking. And again, this is something that would apply as a holistic idea of district signage throughout the entire downtown. These specific locations will later need to be identified before we jump into the design exercise. On the next slide, here's some instances where adding signage is not an option. And on the contrary, maybe consolidating signage will be part of the strategy. What we're trying to do with our network and strategy is not so much add signage to the city, but rather have a consistent approach of how signage is implemented. And sometimes that actually means reducing signage when necessary. So here, for instance, some of these sign plates could all be consolidated into a single post, still serving the same purpose, but avoiding clutter. We're also thinking that the totem signage that is currently located at the Market Square could use an upgrade, which may only be about using the back of it to brand the area and to take advantage of the fact that's already there and showing a front instead of a back when you are arriving to the square. In the next page, here's signage that we think is just in great condition. It is high quality design. It works It is clear, it tells you its purpose, and it contributes to the character of downtown. And when we go to the next slide, basically, it's the idea of retaining the existing signage by the waterfront, which is already a staple of the downtown. Again, to use it as a guideline for future design, but also preserving signage that is in good standing in terms of design standards, or that's already part of the character of the downtown. The next page, that means basically that, and this is just a recommendation or an approach, that the design criteria that comes in the future can incorporate some of these existing design qualities into a new design that will be part of the wayfinding strategy. You know, like it could be colors, materials, shapes, details that can start signaling maybe a theme to help visitors see where they are located inside downtown area, but that somehow are still related to each other. And again, with the idea that this is all focused on economic development strategies, and not necessarily having to add signage, but something that can help us leverage what we already have and reduce costs and make an implementation process as smooth as possible. So that's basically our sort of strategy in existing conditions. Before we move into how we would move into implementing the strategy, we wanted to see, and I sort of shoot it back to Andrew and Matt and Jordi, if we could maybe have a session for Q&A if people have any questions before we keep moving forward.
Yep. Hang on just one second. I'll act as moderator for that. This is Andy Port. I'm just going to throw up a screen, a slide on the screen for everybody just to explain. I think everybody in the audience this evening has probably been here for a public meeting before, but if you'd like to speak, just raise your hand using the Zoom feature and I can unmute you and take any comments you might have. So first we have Jim McCarthy.
How are you? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, Jim McCarthy, 17 Russia Street. Thank you for having the meeting and thank you for allowing me to comment. I think it's a very exciting opportunity here. I think for, as you mentioned, for a very long time, we talked about trying to coordinate what's going on downtown. We've been a very active city for the last year and we've added a lot of stuff. And I think the rights of way have been sort of a dumping ground for all the different efforts. And if this program in any way could coordinate that, that would be great. Seems like every state agency wants to have access to the rights of way. And of course, all the businesses wants to have access to the rights of way. So I look for a way that we could make it more coordinated and visually pleasing. I'd ask to consider a couple tasks. Everybody knows my disdain for extra signage. To me, you mentioned it, we definitely have to take some stuff out. So I think there needs to be a list of what comes out and we need to compare how many you're talking about putting in compared to how many we're going to take out. I think it would be ridiculous to suggest cleaning your basement that's full of boxes by adding another 50 boxes and have it that you're going to be the product that you want. The other thing is we amended our sign code a few years ago to accommodate the movable signs, and we let people move those away from their businesses until wayfinding was in place. So I hope that a second thing we can consider is to amend the code so that once wayfinding is in place, we can regulate the A-frames back to just in front of their businesses. So a couple of action items I would be interested in is show me a list of what you're going to take out. Because again, the state, when they said they wanted to do wayfinding to the airport, the state put half a dozen signs in the city that get you to the airport. The Custom House Museum has half a dozen signs and on and on. So unless we coordinate those, then starting out at the highway, then we're just adding more stuff to the rights of way. So a list of what comes out, and then again, take up the action item of amending the code so that the A-frames go back in front of their businesses. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. The next person we have is Councilor Eigenman.
Yes, thanks for the presentation. My question is really just timing. So this is a great start, and you've obviously familiarized yourself, Harriman has, with the city. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, I think the very first step is, and it's obviously part of our, basically our closing slide, but part of the next steps is making sure that we get basically a lot of support from not only from the community, but all the stakeholders that would be involved. So far, obviously, this has been a reduced group of people, but ideally, this gets open to, say, the Chamber of Commerce and different business owners, and gaining as much momentum, including the community, to be able to make sure that everybody's behind the project. Then we will start looking at the specific locations where signage will be needed, or as it was mentioned before, where signage will be removed or consolidated, signage that basically will remain as is. And that will start getting us an idea of what's the cost of this. And then once we know what the numbers could be, or so an idea of numbers, then we'll start moving into the phase of finding out what funding is. But I don't want to give it all away because it's part of the last slide, but we do have that in consideration. We do have a series of next steps to make sure that this is doable.
All right, then I just would add a suggestion, which is that Newburyport does have a pretty strong ward identity. For example, I'm the counselor for Ward 2, which is downtown. So it probably, rather than, just be sure that you go ward by ward as well, because ultimately that's how it will hit the city council in those boxes. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the audience who'd like to speak? Seeing no hands, Camilla, I'll turn it back to you.
Sure.
Or Matt, if you, this is Andy Port. I'm the planning director. I appreciated the comments that Jim McCarthy had made, and I agree with his general philosophy of taking out the clutter wherever possible. I think, to Councilor Eigenman's question, I just wanted to add that I think, I've been talking about this, some of this wayfinding stuff going back some years, and there was an example in the slide presentation from Brandon Industries, a signpost that they sell, which for relatively short money gives you a signpost and little panels that can swap in and out. They're about the size of street name signs, but you can adjust them and you can basically place them anywhere you need. And by my way of thinking, if we can come up with to Jim McCarthy's point, the fewest amount of places where we need to have signs, have that consensus, as Councilor Eigenman mentioned, by working with each ward. And I definitely see this much of this signage having to do with the Chamber of Commerce or the business side of the community. So working together would be good. But if we can come up with a minimal amount of signage that's necessary, be particular about those points that we might have seen on the map, obviously looking for the fewest necessary, and then agree on a simple, clean, professional design that is consistent with the type of signage Newburyport's been installing in recent years, some of which were in the presentation. Then I think it comes down to, like Camilo said, the funding side of it. But I think we should try to keep it as simple and clean as possible, including the fewest possible locations, to Jim McCarthy's point. So thank you.
If I just, before we hand it over to Camilo, I think something that was missing in the presentation is that, we did have a, albeit, inner working group that wasn't only just Jordy and Andy and myself, but we also had representatives from the chamber. Mark Iannucciolo was active in our meetings. He's no longer at the chamber, but they've been involved in this process as well. Councillor Connell was also part of this process, and then we had a tenant at the tan area as well. So we have had some internal. It wasn't just the staff working on it. We did coordinate with the chamber as well. But obviously, once we roll this out or expand this, there would be much more involvement going forward. So I just wanted to say that before, Camilo, you send it home for us.
Understood. Yeah, no, that is true. In some of the meetings, it was just the city staff, but a lot of them were, as Matt mentioned, people from the business community already aware of this project and actually excited and supportive of this project, and people who were part of the editing of the entire process. So they have been involved in this, and they have been part of the process itself. So yeah, maybe I will go to this last slide, and maybe if people have additional questions. But the last slide is basically about the next steps. And so basically it means that to move forward with the strategy, we need to take advantage of the existing partnerships among the city, which, as mentioned before already, the Chamber of Commerce and the local businesses, to be able to basically build support for the program. And this, of course, involves you, the community, to make sure that the entire city is behind this and that it's on board with these ideas. We also need to coordinate, and I think it was also brought up earlier, the overlapping jurisdictions, right? This includes addressing things like zoning, permitting, operations and maintenance, and making sure that all these city agencies understand the goals and their role in making sure that this is a successful project. Then we need to begin the next steps, which include continuing with the existing working group that has been involved since the beginning of the project, but also, if needed, maybe identify additional people that can become additional leaders, spokespeople that can help push the project forward. We also have to develop a full scope of work for a graphic design consultant to take on the actual design of the signage. But we also, before that, we even need to identify the places where we need to include the signage or be reduced, or the one that remains. We also need to identify the funding sources to finance the project, and this includes funds that can be secured through grants or donations, or by developing relationships with the involved stakeholders, or even maybe some state federal funds. And again, as I mentioned before, make sure we introduce the new signage to fill in the gaps in the network, and that will be complementary to the signage that we already have in the city. And so that's it. Our next slide is our last slide, and is thank you everyone for giving us the opportunity to work in this project. We're very excited about it, and we hope that you are excited as well, and we hope that this actually moves forward.
Thank you, Camilo. Thank you, everybody, for attending this evening. Have a
Thank
good
you
night.
all. It's been a pleasure to work in Newburyport.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.